Hello, everyone. We hope you're having a fantastic day and a great time at writehive 2025, where we're writing the future we need for our sixth consecutive year. My name is Jesse Pullman. I'm a moderator for writehive, and welcome to our event called How to Blend Genres. If you look through writehive's various YouTube videos, you'll see plenty of them about various genres. Now it's time to blend them all together. If you see me looking down and away from the camera, it's probably me scribbling notes to possibly incorporate into later questions. Last note before I welcome people to introduce themselves is that if you're in Discord chat, feel free to leave your questions and our panelists will answer them as soon as possible. With that said, let me turn the microphone over to our first panelist. Ananya, you're up.
Hi everyone. My name is Ananya Devarajan. I'm the author of two young adult romance novels, my first being Kismet Connection, which released back in 2023, and my current young adult romance novel, Sanskari Sweetheart, comes out in actually about 14 days, which is very exciting. I write young adult speculative romances that have a magical twist in a contemporary world, borrowing from genres like science fiction and fantasy, while maintaining a romantic atmosphere, and I'm so excited to be a part of this conversation.
Thank you for being here. That brings us to AP.
Hi everyone, I'm AP Hawkins. I'm a science fiction and fantasy writer and an editor with Tomeworks Editing. And I have a few short stories that have been published in venues like Analog and Escape Pod. And with Tomeworks, I edit mostly fantasy, but also science fiction. And our editing group does any genre fiction. That's kind of our main focus. So I'm really excited to be here to talk about one of my favorite kind of types of genres, blended genres. I'm really excited. So it's good to be here.
Great to have you. And that brings us to Adrian.
Hello, everyone. I'm Adrian M. Gibson. I am the creator and co-host of SFF Addicts podcast, which I co-host with MJ Kuhn and Greta Kelly. As well as that, I'm the author of Mushroom Blues, which is my debut novel and the first book in the Hoffman Report series, but also the Fungal Verse, which is like a fictional shared universe that will feature many books and many series across different time periods. But blending genres is kind of like one of the main sort of I would say foundational pillars of the Fungal Verse. Mushroom Blues is a police procedural noir, but it blends that with fungi and urban fantasy, elements of science fiction and cyberpunk as well. So there's definitely a lot of interplay between different genres that's going on, and that's something that will progress through the series. And then other books that I write in this universe will also blend different types of genres of all sorts. So I'm really excited to talk about this topic. It's something that is very near and dear to my heart. So thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. Thank you for joining us. That brings us to Robert.
Hey, my name's Robert Jeffrey. I'm a freelance writer, 19 years of experience in comic books, prose fiction, video games, tabletop RPGs. I've worked for clients such as DC Comics, Blowfish Studios, and a bunch of other comic book publishers, and I'm happy to be here.
Thank you so much for being here, Robert. That brings us to Marv, last but not least.
Hi, I'm Marv, and I realize now I'm a novelist because I haven't written so many different things. And I have written thrillers and fantasy, and my latest or my debut fantasy really is out later this year in October. It's titled First Born of the Sun, and I've been writing for about 10 years. Um, and in that 10 years, I have about three novels. So that's how I've split my time. But it's nice to be here.
All right, so on to our first question for the panel. How do you define genres and what does it mean to blend them? In other words, what goes into this process of what we're talking about today, blending genres? What is a genre? Define it if you can, define it how you want to define it, and then tell us how you blend them. Do you use a Ninja Blender? I don't know.
So I have a very loose definition for genres. I think genre conventions matter and genre conventions are there for a reason. And I am, at least in the romance field, a firm believer in that romances require happily ever afters, or at the very least, a happy for now. That is a pillar to the romantic genre. And so I can't call myself a romance author if I don't hit that convention. But how we get there is where you get to blend the genre and where you get to have a lot of fun with it. So, at least for me, I have been really diving into magical realism, and as a woman of color coming from an Indian cultural background, I also don't necessarily believe in genre conventions by a Western view. So I think that how and like how we're going to talk about these characters, how we're going to show their journey, their thought process, it doesn't have to fit that traditional Western hero's arc. It doesn't have to fit traditional mechanisms of communication, of problem solving. So I like to blend genres not only in elements, like adding in a time loop into a romance novel, but I also like to add in a little bit more of Western, non-Western storytelling forms. And I think that creates its own subset within any genre. So I think that was a little bit of a big answer on how to blend them. But my long story short of it all is that a genre is what you make of it, as long as you follow the conventions that still keep you there.
I agree with you. I think, genre is a way of establishing like a common language with your reader. Because a reader, when they pick up a book that is billed as being in a certain genre, they come to that book with particular expectations for what they're going to find inside. And it's really fun when you can take elements from several different genres and whether they're like similar genres or very different ones, it's kind of fun when you can take those elements and blend them together and still create something that your readers like recognize and enjoy because of those like added elements that they maybe didn't expect. So, also, I thought it was really funny what you said about romance. Yeah, the romance genre having the very strict happily ever after or happy for now convention. I have a friend who writes romance, and readers will come for you
Yep.
if you don't follow the romance readers will come for you if you don't follow that expectation. So.
I think like expectation, what both of you said is so key to this because genre as like an umbrella term, it kind of mostly benefits booksellers and publishers. All the people who are working in the actual marketplace side of things. And then also for readers, that's where the expectation comes in. So it's like, yes, a bookseller is going to be very happy that it's like, oh, I can shelf this under fantasy or science fiction or romance or whatever. But that's just a marketing term and a marketing tool for them to be able to classify things and confine it into a system that works for them on a business standpoint. But then for readers, that's where expectations come in. Because if a reader can see like, okay, this is romance, or in my case, like police procedurals and murder mysteries and stuff like that, I think the same sort of logic applies, although I don't think readers of murder mysteries and police procedurals are as dogmatic as romance readers. They won't like, put your head on a spike or anything like that. They're not gonna riot in the streets if you don't have your, picture perfect ending or what have you. But the main point is that these expectations kind of create a scaffolding, and from like a story perspective, like you hit different beats that a reader is kind of looking forward to in this type of story. And if you can hit those beats, then what you can do is really rope them into a story that they're comfortable with, and they're able to immerse themselves into the story more than they normally would. But then that's when you can throw other genres in there to really, and that's what I love doing, is being like, here's like police procedural beats and murder mystery beats to get you into the world, but then I'm just going to throw more and more weird stuff at you, and make you more and more uncomfortable. But you still have that scaffolding of murder mystery, of police procedural to carry you through, and know that this story is going to satisfy you and your expectations in certain ways, despite the fact that these other genres that are coming in here are going to deliver all kinds of unique surprises.
When I think about genres, I just think about categorizations or categories. It's fun categories, especially with being a fan of speculative fiction. So that you have so many like subgenres that are just underneath that genre, but it's a way to for whatever purposes to categorize a certain type of story that's being told. So you could look at it from a fan perspective like me, or from the perspective of like bookstores or comic book stores that have to find ways to um, differentiate, the types of product that they're selling. So it's a way to, genre can be a creative way of categorizing, different types of stories.
I have to agree with that, almost word for word, to be honest, because it is, genre, it is definitely a way to kind of splice up stories to say, if you read this science fiction and fantasy novel, this is the kind of things to expect. And if you're reading a contemporary romance novel, this is the kind of things to expect. And so the genre alone will give you a very good idea of sometimes even the story beats, sometimes what the plot can look like, before you even read what the synopsis or the blurb is. And this is for readers, of course. And then that, on the other hand, helps marketing, publishing, booksellers. And you hear very often, in the publishing world, things like, we don't know where to put that, or we don't know how we would market this. And that's because you've done a bit of blending there, which probably talk about in a bit, but you've broken the rules of those very fixed boxes, which are useful, um, but always worth breaking out of once in a while.
With that in mind, with all of these different beats knocking around in the same book, how do you maintain a balance between all of these different genres you're working with? And in other words, if you've got romance going on, how far can you stretch romance before it becomes something else? How much do you have to work to blend in something else before it loses that conventional, say, protection of a good, happy ending, or at least a happy for now ending? Yeah, at what point do you get done with, I don't know, sticking them in the food processor and seeing what comes out the other end? I know, I'm just coming up with metaphors for this.
Oh, I love the food processor because that's honestly what it feels like in the drafting process. But I think finding that balance, and it's something Adrian and AP talked about earlier that I thought was really insightful. It's those beats and it's hitting those important parts that readers and booksellers and publishing professionals have those expectations, and you're not going to be able to change those expectations. They're there for a reason to have these genres. But I think maintaining balance, at least in my experience, is in a romance novel, people are not just reading for the love story, they're reading for characters. They're reading for people that they root for, people that they want to see fall in love, so that they receive the happiness that those characters get from falling in love. It's a form of escapism through people. So when I was writing my novel, I knew I needed to have a teenage girl who was relatable, a teenage girl whose problems felt real to other teenage girls, and a teenage relationship that was worth rooting for, even if the setting and the timeline and everything else was just thrown out the window. So in writing a time loop, I knew I could utilize the time loop and the science fiction elements and the magical realism as a mechanism of character development and as a mechanism of romantic development. And that's how this book became a romance with science fiction elements rather than a science fiction with the romantic subplot. And I think maintaining balance is really just identifying what is your core genre, and is the blended genre assisting it and helping the plot and the characters move forward in a unique way? Or is the extra genre just background? And I think the perfect balance comes when they play off of each other in a way that another book without it wouldn't necessarily be able to do.
Yeah, I think you really hit on like the main point of it, right? Like you have to identify what your core is, what the core of your story is, um, before you can start like adding those blended elements to it. Because if your story doesn't have like a strong core, um, adding like elements from different genres is just going to end up confusing your reader. They're not really going to know what they're reading. But if they have like a strong core of like a romance or a police procedural, or just very strong characters to root for, then the other genres can come in a way that feels satisfying to readers and that is less kind of confusing.
Yeah, I think it's very easy for the sort of subgenres or like the blended genres to kind of try and creep in and take over the main genre. So a lot of it, I think, really comes down to it's going to depend on story by story. So it's like every story is different depending on its necessities and the characters and everything like that. And I agree with both Ananya and AP that character is so important. It doesn't have to be a likable character like in Mushroom Blues. The main character is not, a good person, but there are still qualities that you can kind of latch onto. And the idea that this character is going to go through some sort of change, and that can be a really strong latch point for readers to grab onto and carry them through a story. But then also like the side characters and how they play off of the main character are really important as well. So those characters can kind of dictate what the story is trying to do. And in my case, it's like if I'm letting anything overshadow the murder mystery, then I'm not I'm not doing due diligence when it comes to the genre blending in that sense. So it's like that fundamental core, like EP was saying, is really important. But at the same time, genre doesn't necessarily have to just be plot. It can also be world building. It can also be aesthetics. It can also be atmosphere and mood. And so my novel, there are moments where it's like, because it's with fungi, if anyone's watched The Last of Us or anything like that, there are moments of really intense mycelial fungal body horror. But that's like a small snippet of horror infusing itself into the story, but not dominating any one part of the story. There are also other times where, you know, there are deep conversations about colonialism and conversations about discrimination and racism and things like that. So these are things that can be infused into the world building and the very fabric of the world and what the characters, I would say, lived experiences. And that can also be genre living and breathing through the world and through the characters, as opposed to necessarily like, I'm going to write a romance book with science fiction elements, but I also have to hit all of those science fiction plot and beats and expectations. No, like you can have a romance that includes science fiction elements, but it doesn't necessarily have to be infused through the plot. It can be part of the character. It can be part of the world. All different aspects of the story.
The I guess the way that I do it, and it's in comics, is it's kind of like you're picking and pulling from the various genres that you're working with to the various aspects of whatever genre. So like you pull an aspect of horror or something from like sci-fi and pull it all together like a cake or something. Like that's a very simplistic way of like putting it. But I find the parts of the genre that work best for telling the story that I'm trying to tell, if that makes any sense. So the example I always give is I wrote and created a story called Mind to Avenge. So it's a cyberpunk horror um, story with some social commentary. So, and no social commentary is in its own genre, but you know, I try to find the most outlandish sci-fi elements of cyberpunk, fiction that I wanted to add within the story, and the same thing with horror. The most like messed up, depraved aspects that would work for the story that I was telling. So, um, I find that maintaining that balance is just is it's not easy. It's something that you have to learn how to do. But I think like I said, the best to answer the question, the best way that I do it is to just make sure that there's enough of each, that it's helping to tell the story that I'm trying to tell.
It helps me to have a a grounding or a foundational genre. So the one that is the base. If you think about it in terms of like you're making a cake or making a pie, it could be a strawberry cake or a strawberry pie, but the cake or the pie is the thing that makes you know what pastry you're making. I don't know if that's a good example, but I tend to have, I want this is a fantasy novel, and I want to um blend genres with romance, or I want to blend genres with thriller. And so that's what I want to use as a tool to move my plot along. But it would still, it helps to know whether or not I can add magic to it, for example, whether or not I can make people fly. So those grounding roles, that base genre is what I would choose first. And then the elements that I can use from other genres to make it elevated within that category is kind of how I go about it.
You've all said a lot of different things about characters, which is awesome. You've also said a lot of different things about the genres you work in already. So this question I'm going to mix up just a little bit. Instead of saying what genres do you find blend well and what are your favorite concoctions, how about give us some ways that you've blended genres, what you've done with them. I know you've sort of touched on this already, some of you, but give us a little more depth about what you've done that's really like at the core of the blend. In other words, what are some of the seeds that survive the food processor in its merciless destruction of all matter that is placed between its blades?
Hopefully, no one's too hungry after they listen to this.
Part of my own experience, I first started on a very like low level genre blending. I was a debut author. I published my first book, Kismet Connection, in my final senior year of college. So I was very young, first starting out in traditional publishing, 21 years old. So the max I could really take it with that confidence was magical realism, elements of the universe and astrology and all that, a little bit more of a softer form of genre blending there for my first book. But with my second book, which I wrote throughout medical school, I think I had a little bit more confidence being now considered a career writer in traditional publishing. And so for me, what genre blending looked like was I knew I wanted to teach Raina, my main character, a lesson about taking her love story for granted and about learning how to communicate even when you don't want to in order to make a relationship succeed. And I think that's an important lesson for teenagers to think about as they encounter their first romantic relationships. So to get that theme across, I realized that a time loop where you were given the opportunity over and over and over again to communicate your way out of a bad situation is the most, I thought it was a brilliant way to dive into how teenagers figure out conflict resolution, especially when they're faced with it every single day. And what that specifically looked like in terms of a scene, and probably my favorite part to write, is you have this girl waking up every day in the same morning in the same bed at this big Bollywood dance competition that she's performing in, and that's the science fiction element. That's the time loop. But every morning starts with her boyfriend kissing her, and every night ends with her boyfriend breaking up with her. And that's how you get the romantic tension within the science fiction world. And I think it becomes very clear then with each loop what the purpose of this loop is. It's not just there for decoration, it's there to actively show you how she gets from the perfect relationship to the worst relationship and how she stops it after 8 loops. So for me, that has been such a fun part of the food processor. But there are things that I was not, me and my editor at least worked together to kind of take out of it. For example, as Adrian was saying earlier, not every part of science fiction needs to be involved here. And if you do, you lose the core, which is what AP was talking about. So, like, for example, I kind of got really deep into reading science fiction to help best research for this novel. And there are certain conventions and world building techniques that I, one, don't think I have the experience to properly write about. And I don't necessarily want to put my nose in genres that I don't fully feel confident to talk about. And two, it doesn't really help the book as much as it could. So those were things that got taken out through the editorial process. But at the beginning, it's really fun to just experiment with all of it. And I think that's what I would recommend anyone do if they're going to blend genres.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree. Experimentation is key, right? Figuring out, what you like as an author and mixing those things together in a way that come like create something cohesive, right? Me personally, I love a good science fantasy um, where you have the book that I'm querying right now is sci fantasy, and so it's a lot of ancient technology that even for us is really advanced. but it's ancient technology that's been misinterpreted over millennia as magic. Um, and so that's kind of like the core of the blended genre world building here. And so it's been really fun, like in writing that book, to kind of play with that and see, okay, well, like what kind of technologies might this ancient civilization have had that could be interpreted as magic by future less advanced civilization, and throwing those things at my characters and seeing how they react to them. Is a lot of fun. So that's kind of my favorite thing that I'm working on right now. That's kind of like in that food processor is just taking um, possible future technologies and giving them like a magical twist. So, or having them like seen as magic.
That experimentation is so key. Honestly, it's the best part of
Mhm.
genre blending because
Yeah.
um yeah, I mean, we're writing because we love stories, but it's also like we write because it's fun. It's not like obviously there are some times when this craft is very difficult, but we push through the difficult parts and really savor and embrace the fun times. And that's kind of, for me personally, that's what keeps me going. And when it comes to genre blending, that is a really good way to keep myself motivated because it keeps the story fresh. It keeps the world fresh. And if something is not, like in the case of Mushroom Blues, it's a secondary fantasy world where there are humans, but then there are also this small subset of fungal people who live in their sort of like isolated island nation and have survived for thousands and thousands of years on their own. But humans discover that they're there, and for reasons that aren't revealed yet in book one, they invade this nation of fungal people and occupy it. So there's a war called the Spore War, and the fungal people lose it, and then there's an occupation by the humans. And so it's kind of very much inspired by the Allied occupation of Japan after World War II. And the fungal people in their society are very much inspired by Japan and other East Asian cultures. And so this was kind of my way within the framework of murder mystery to explore themes of imperialism and colonization, colonialism through the lens of this really weird fungal world. So the main characters in this city, the capital city of Neo-Kanoko, which is the fungal people's capital city, and she works for the police force and she has to solve the murder of a fungal child. And so it's kind of ingrained in the humans that they are discriminatory and racist towards the fungal people. And so a lot of this book and the world and the murder mystery were laying the groundwork for opportunities for her to be confronted with her racism, and opportunities for her because she's paired up with a mushroom-headed bee cop named Koji, and because she has to work with this fungal cop, she has to constantly confront her feelings and her sort of preconceived notions about who these fungal people are. So the murder mystery is kind of carrying the story along, but there's a lot of character work in which Henrietta, the human detective, and her partner Koji are going around the city investigating and interrogating people and doing all the kind of police procedural things that you would expect. But beneath the surface, it's about this woman who is confronting her racism and confronting her past and coming to grips with what she's done up until this point. And ultimately the story, like one of its big thematic through lines is awakening and acceptance of who you are and what you've done and what you believe, and whether it's a culturally imposed belief or whether it's your own sort of personal truth. And so Henrietta goes through a lot of these massive hurdles, and the murder mystery allows for opportunities for her to experience things that really shake the foundations of what she believes in. And so I think blending genres gives you those opportunities to give your characters more depth outside of the sort of conventions of the main genre, and really start pulling in other thematic threads and things that are adding complexity to the world and the characters and the things that they experience in that world.
For me, I think I mentioned it before. I'm becoming a big fan of well, one of them, horror and sci-fi. Um, there's just something about you know melding the sciency aspects of our world with the supernatural, or and it doesn't actually have to be supernatural, but just the scary aspects of things. And the other one, action and sci-fi. And I know like action is like a huge could be like a huge umbrella, but yeah, that's those are two. And I they're fun. They're a fun mix, So I don't know. One of the things that I love about with the writing that I do is that I try not to stick with one genre. I get bored, so it's fun to create that kind of brew, that witch's brew. But those are, I guess, two pairings that are my favorite.
I love mixing in thriller with anything that I write. So the thriller, the suspense, um, regardless of the novel that I'm writing, I still want my reader to feel as though they were reading a purely thrilling novel, something that you could file under thriller, but is for some reason in fantasy. And so the same kind of beats and plots and wondering what's going to happen next and trying to solve out some sort of mystery or having unanswered questions. I think that just works so well, because again, with fantasy, it's often used as an easier way to discuss, things happening in the real world and society. And it's, easier to support a fair revolution than it is to support a human one. And so we use so many tools to kind of mask the message that we're trying to pass across. And so when you put in things like suspense, which I think would include what you've said, like horror and action, and that fast-paced movement of the plot, I think it works so well. Um, the second genre I think works all the time is romance, and I think it's underrated because love makes the world go round. And there is nothing more thrilling than having, a group of main characters or a singular main character and having them be in a position where they're having to choose between, the love they have for someone and the passion they have for something else. And whether that is in saving the world, in saving their just own little world, it is very difficult to find a motivating main character that is not influenced by romance in some way, whether or not that romance is then like a full-blown one or, however shape or form you want to have it in. I think that also goes a long way to having characters that feel real. And so my defaults would always be a thrilling suspense and a romance in whatever I'm writing.
I love the zeroing in on the idea that experimentation is key. You never know what you're going to throw into the blender. You never know what's going to come out of it. So what are some things that sound like they might blend well? Some genres that look like great ingredients that you're going to drop into the ninja and then you realize as they fall in like, oh, wait a minute, that that acid from that lime might contrast with the milk from the cream that you're putting in. I don't know, I'm not a chef.
It's gonna curdle.
But
It's gonna go
it's
bad.
gonna curdle. Oh no. What are we doing here? So, what are some genres that absolutely don't blend well, that might sound good, but turn into poison? And Ananya, I invite you to be our first volunteer if you're so kind.
Sure. I actually think I'm going to take the route of saying that I think it's possible to blend any genre together. It's a matter of how you do it. It's a matter of the mechanism of the genre, of the purpose of why you have decided to blend. I think honing in on your own writing process and your own idea and being like, why do I want to see these two together is key. Um, and the reason why I'm saying that is because my background obviously is in romance, and you see romantasy, which is romantic fantasy. You see romantic mystery. You see romantic police procedurals, because I've seen one of those. I see romantic history. I see romantic science fiction. So I think because that's my background, and I've seen so many incredible pioneers in the romance field blend such insanely different genres in such an incredible way, makes me feel like there's always a possibility and there's always a way to make two things feel incredible or at least taste incredible in the food blender if you really know how to put them together. So my underlying point here is I think as long as you know why you have put these two things, why there was a reason, like you didn't just pick two things out of a hat, you are intentionally deciding what your story needs and desires the most, then you can blend the genre, I think, perfectly, given that hard work. But I think the problem really comes into when you're just kind of picking and choosing for the fun of it. And that's maybe not something I would recommend. It's something that experimentation can help a lot with.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. I think, if you get a little bit creative and you work really hard at it and you play around with it some, I think you can work out a blend for pretty much any genre that will be satisfying to readers. Obviously, no book is for everybody, right? Like
Hmm.
you're not writing for everybody there, but there is a reader for every book, right? So you will find readers who want to read cozy horror or, um, romantic fantasy or, whatever, like sci-fi murder mystery. Like, you will find readers that want to read all of those things. And I think the problem comes in when you're blending genres. The problem comes in, I think, when you forget the core of your story. Um, and so you really have to keep in mind like what your story is and what your characters are doing and the kind of story you're trying to tell. And then the genre elements are kind of like gravy, right? Um, but uh, but yeah, no, I really like firmly believe you can really blend anything. And experimentation. We've talked about it several times already. I'm a big proponent of short stories.
Hmm.
Whenever I am building a new world and thinking about a new book, a new story, um, after I get like the basics of the world building down, one of the first things I do is go write short stories in that world, and that helps me flesh out the world building details, make sure that my blended genre is working well and it's not throwing anybody off. So I highly, if you're looking for new ways to experiment with your writing and experiment with blending genres, highly recommend writing short stories.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. The short story thing is really important because it doesn't matter if you screw up. Like it's like 7,000 words, 10,000 words, whatever. Like you can play around with it. And I think short stories really help to um, get a feel for the atmosphere and the vibe of a world. Because once you have that, then it's a really cohesive and sort of like genuine process to blend in genres that feel right for the vibe of the world that you're creating. And so it's like that experimentation really helps to find the core. Um, and from my perspective, I agree with what both of you said. Um, Finding that core is really important because it helps you find the most genuine version of that story that you want to tell, as opposed to like writing for market or anything like that. All the best genre blending smash successes, like anything in romantasy now, like cozy fantasy, like Legends and Lattes and things like that, those are stories that people told for themselves. And the genre blending became defined by publishers and booksellers who wanted to take that and market it to a broader audience. But if you can write a, instead of writing to market, you could write a story that's really for yourself. And who knows, like you might end up being like, I don't know, like AP, you said cozy horror, and I just love the strange like paradox of that genre. You might be the person who comes to define cozy horror in like the traditional market. And that's why I love self-publishing, because self-publishing allows for a lot of that experimentation. And a lot of these authors are writing these stories for themselves. And what traditional publishing does really well is it plucks successful and really well done, powerful stories from self-publishing and brings it into the traditional publishing fold and gives it a platform and a marketing push and all that. And hopefully after that, more readers are like, I want more, I want more. Like, give me more of that particular strange genre blended mix. And so I think it's really important for writers to think about, like, why do I want to blend these genres together? Why is that the ideal genre blend for my story and for my truth and what I want to put out into the world? Because you're going to get to a point where it's like, if you're self-publishing, you have to be able to market that book to people and give them a clear idea of what is this. You're also, on the traditional side of things, if you're going to query agents, you have to be able to pitch your agent about what this book is, what genres it falls into. And so if you don't have a clear idea of, like, what genres did I blend together? What is the core of my story? Then readers are going to be confused, and agents are going to be confused. Editors are going to be confused. And so it's like all along the chain, there's just going to be confusion if you don't know what your story is. So I think it's really important. Like, I agree with both of you that no genres are off limits. Like, anything could be blended together, but it has to be done in such a way where it feels truthful to the author, and they're doing it in an intentional way where they understand what's going on in the different genres and how they're blending together, so that when it comes down to it, you can market it to a reader, you can market it to an agent, and you're going to be able to do that successfully. And who knows, like, how it might take off once you do. But you have to be able to understand what's going on in these genres and how you're mixing them together, because otherwise you're going to be just as lost as anyone who you're trying to pitch it to.
Yeah, I didn't want to interrupt you, but when you mentioned cozy horror, there's actually a cozy horror novel that was nominated for the Nebulas this year.
Amazing. What's it called?
I forget the title is like Someone to Build a Nest In or something. The author's Jonathan Wiswell is the
Okay,
author. But yeah, it's so there are readers for
perfect.
pretty much anything you can come up with in terms of blending genres. So
I love it. See, so
yeah,
that's a perfect example. It's like nothing's off limits. You
yeah,
can you can figure out things that are, truthful to the story that you want to tell. And if it's cozy and if it's horror, hell yeah, just
yeah.
go for it. But, like, put your passion behind it, but also be intentional and be aware of what works in each genre and the elements that you can sort of pluck and combine from each.
I guess piggybacking, off of the previous responses, I I don't necessarily I haven't come across in genres that don't blend well. Um, it's, as I kind of mentioned before, you pick and pull what from each genre, what services the story, what helps the story. So if you find with, whatever you're pulling, from each of these genres is it's not vibing with the tale that you're trying to tell, say that 5 times fast, it you probably do get a case of, like, blending not, the genre blending not working. But for the most part, I haven't come across, any two or few that don't work well or that don't blend well.
I think the genres in themselves would always work and always blend. It comes down to the skill of the writer. I think it is really hard to pull off some particular mixes, and that's just as a result of what you're trying to do. Comedy is one that I think is the hardest to do with anything, and that's because it's hard to be funny on page, because obviously we're not hearing your intonations, we're relying solely on your character. And so you could do a comedic horror and do it so well that it's equal parts scary, but we just think this is a hilarious main character. But that is so hard to do. That's something that I feel like you probably need to spend a few hours studying, like the craft, the plot bits, what other people have done. And I think the genre blends that come is more easily are things that you can do as an intuitive writer. So say you haven't had any craft training, and you just think, I want to write this story and I want to write something that has romance, I want to write something that has suspense. And that's usually easy because I feel like most people consume that anyways. But then when you start blending and mixing genres that are a bit trickier or is not something that you consume on a daily basis, you actually have to be immersed in it so that when we read it, it feels as natural as you're trying to make it. So I've definitely read genre blends that did not work, but I don't think it's the genre's fault. I think it's more on execution.
Every right eye, we seem to have a question where the purpose is for it to be put in the blender. It's a question that is like Ananya said, what are the genres you can't blend? You can blend any. What's the key? Experimentation. The problem you find is you forget the core, and I think that's going to be the key to what the next question is. Because the next question is it possible to blend too many genres together? In other words, is it possible to overstuff our metaphorical blender? And it seems like that answer might be obvious, but maybe you have some insight that I don't. Maybe you folks will be able to find something deeper on that level that is more than just what I've understood, because I'm not the best at blending genres.
As I mentioned earlier, you can always do anything. There's never a rule saying you can't do something, but, and the but is underlined, I think, here multiple times. It has to make sense and it has to not overpower the core. The core, the core, the core. That's like, I think the thesis of this conversation is what is your story? And so, one example I will give. Contemporary is a very different genre than romance. And just literary fiction, women's fiction, different genre than romance. And it's more than just that happily ever after. Contemporary does dive into a little bit more um, on person-to-person communication, person-to-person development without a romantic subplot a lot of the time. And that's why it doesn't require that happily ever after, right? So I've noticed, at least in my book, that in putting in this time loop and in taking in these huge science fiction elements that require a lot of research and effort to incorporate into a romantic novel, I normally, and most romance authors in the traditional field will take contemporary aspects of who are you? What kind of person am I in society? What kind of person do I want to be? And a lot of those questions that got answered in my first book, which was a little bit more of a lighter blend of magical realism, there was just not space or time or ability to put that in this current book. So, I think one thing I really had to cut out is a big part of my first book was the importance of family in the growth of a child, in the development of a teenage person into a full adult, and how they become healthy, how they become wonderful human beings because of their parents. That was something I wanted to incorporate in my second book because it's something that means a lot to me and it's something that I borrow from the contemporary field, but I couldn't do it to the level that I wanted to. At least in the first draft, there was like an extra 20,000 words of family dynamics that helped incorporate for this character building. And my editor and I had a conversation, and it was if you want to do 8 time loops about why a romantic relationship is failing, you only have then 6 chapters at the beginning and the end to do family. So you need to be very careful about what theme you're going to bring in here and how you're going to resolve it as a hanging narrative in this time loop where the family technically does not exist, but needs to still exist. And so that is my caveat for blending too many genres together. It's something's going to have to take a priority. And if the third thing you want to bring in, or the fourth or the fifth, you can't do it justice with that priority schedule lined up, I personally would not recommend it for the sake of your reader, your story, and maintaining a really genuine piece of art.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it is possible to try to do too much. Um, and that's not to say don't try, right?
Mhm.
Obviously experimentation, we've talked about experimentation is so important. And, if you have a vision, definitely try to, bring it to fruition, but just know that it is possible for there to be too much there. I've run into this problem before, particularly writing short stories where, I have this world that I'm building and I have some elements in it, like whether they're from blended genres or not, even if it's like just two different fantasy elements that I'm trying to incorporate into the world building. Um, where especially in a short story, you don't have the room to fully explore, like you were talking about, Ananya, like where you just don't have the room in your story to fully explore all of these elements that you're incorporating. And usually something can lift right out and without really changing the story. But that's again why experimentation and playing around with the worlds you're building and the genres you're blending are so important. And I think that we've touched on marketing a little bit, all right, a few times. I think that where doing too much in terms of blending genres becomes really important, even if you come up with, you've created like a cohesive story that makes sense and like all your genres are kind of fully explored and, incorporated into your story. Um, when it comes time to market your book, whether you're marketing it directly to your readers or you're trying to query an agent, um, you can't be throwing like, five different genres at your readers or at the agents that you're trying to market because you're going to confuse them. They're not going to know what you're trying to do. And so again, it goes back to identifying the core. And I've advised editing clients of this before, where identify one or two genres that are like the main genres of your story. This is like, uh, whatever one that maybe has to do with your plot and one that maybe has to do more with your world building. Just identify two main genres and kind of leave the rest for the reader to discover as they uh, work their way through your book. So
I'm nodding vigorously, AP. Like, I agree with that so much because when it comes down to it, like this applies to comps, which is just like the market term for comparison. So it's like you could say my book is a mix of X and Y. You could broaden that out a little bit. Doesn't necessarily have to be two things, but I think it is really important to find like, okay, it doesn't necessarily have to be world building and plot, but I think those are two really important pillars of a story. So it's like you could say like, in my case, my world building, I liken it to Jeff Vandermeer and China Miéville. Whereas my plot, I could liken it to something like True Detective. So those are two really easy comparisons that build a sense in this person's head that says, murder mystery, weird. And I'm like, good, I can roll with that. Everything else is just a matter of how well the story conveys and how well it blends those genres into the fabric of its existence as a book or a story. And I like to think of it as kind of like a lot of the times when you're a kid, it's like, oh, you're going to have a project in school where you make bridges out of like pasta or something like that, right? And so you start to learn about like structural integrity when it comes to engineering, and you have to understand there is structural integrity to a story as well. You cannot have too many pressure points. You cannot have too many load-bearing points on your story bridge, because if you dump too much on it, those points are going to have more and more tension and pressure, and eventually they're going to snap and the whole story is going to fall apart. So what you need to do is identify which genres are the load-bearing genres, which genres are the vehicles or the passengers that are crossing that bridge. Because when it comes down to it, it's like I was saying earlier, you don't have to necessarily think that a genre is the plot. It can be infused into the world, it can be infused into the character. I think like my characters and my world are like quite grimdark, but it's not like a traditional grimdark fantasy. I'm just taking elements from the morally gray aspects of grimdark world building and grimdark characterization. One of my favorite examples of genre blending is the Expanse series by James S. A. Corey. And I think that series does a really good job of, if you have too many genres in your head, you can think about it this way. If you're writing a series, book one doesn't have to dump everything into it. You can have book one, in the case of The Expanse, book one, Leviathan's Wake, is space opera murder mystery. Book 2 is space opera military sci-fi. Book 3 is kind of a little like continuing along like military sci-fi vibes. But then book 4 is basically like a space western where they're going to a frontier planet and is like very much like a western story combined with sci-fi and space opera. And that continues as the series goes along. So you can think about this in the long term as well. If you feel like there's too much going on in one story, don't throw those ideas away. Don't throw those genres away. Apply them to the next thing, whether that's an entirely new story or an entirely new world. Or in the case of like Mushroom Blues, I have 3 sequels for this series. Book 1 is dealing with things that I knew it could handle. Book 2 is going to augment that and bring in new stuff. So you do not have to be confined with a single story or a single book. You can spread these things out such that each book is a structurally sound, bridge or whatever metaphor you want to use.
I think yeah, there's you too much of something can be bad at times. I don't know. It's like sometimes I don't know if this is the best comparison, but it's like when I hear, when I go to panels on world building and, talk with other writers and or people who are writing books and or writing short stories or whatever, and then they're like, I have this great world and it's so vast and this and that and this and that. And, it's just like, so what's your story? So like what's the story? So I kind of feel the same way about wanting to throw a lot of different genres into the blender. You're going to get lost in the weeds of what you're trying to mash up, and it could be fun. It can be great to have your steampunk zombie thriller. That's fun. I would love to read that. But then if you start adding too much to that, and it gets kind of bogged down, and there's a chance that you might lose the story that you're trying to tell. So yes, the short answer is yes.
I think anything more than 3 is pushing it even.
Mm.
um, 3 being the absolute max. Ideally, I think a 2 genre blend is good because when you think about the core, if it takes 60% of your work and 40% is what you've sprinkled into the plot to make it go in the way that allows you to weave in and out seamlessly, there is no space. The plot is full. And the more things you add, the longer the story will force itself to be because you will feel like you have not hit the beats in the genre you've included into it. And you will then disappoint readers who you will tell that this is say, for example, a horror cyberpunk romance about vampires in space. Like, there's so many things that, if I go into anything thinking vampires and for some reason you don't show me, the interactions that this vampire has with this cyberpunk world, I'll be thinking, wait, if they're in space, are they drinking blood? Like, how does that go? I want to know more about this, but there's no space for that because there's only so many words you can have in a novel because you're doing other things. You're doing the horror. Say if you add in comedy, you're trying to be funny. It's just too much is happening. And I think the ideal blend would be 2. I think being really creative and breaking the rules, 3 would work. I support fully breaking the rules, but I feel like you need to know the rules in order to break them in a way that works for your story. Um, so yeah, I think you can get too carried away at some point, and it is really difficult to compress stories into a single word. My fantasy novel was 160,000 words, and it took me 2 years and a full team to be able to get one sentence out of that. But you should still be able to summarize your story into 1 or 2 sentences so that um, whoever you're saying it to, whoever you're pitching to, your reader, understands what to expect when that is blown out.
Our last full-on question is how do you label a story with multiple genres? In other words, we put all this stuff into the blender, we've poured it out into a nice serving dish or serving glass or whatever you call a thing that you serve, a vessel. What do you slap on that vessel when you've got all of these things blended together?
So I will, I guess, tackle this perspective from traditional publishing because that is all I know. So I can't speak to any other industry and how they choose to market. But for me, my first book, that was the one I queried to my agent, and me and my agent have been together now for the last 4 years. And my second book is in the same contract with HarperCollins. So that's how that happened for me. My first book was comped as a contemporary with a romance with some magic. So it was as simple as comping fake dating of To All the Boys I Loved Before meets the Indian American representation of Never Have I Ever, which had just blown up in 2019. That was how that book was pitched. And I think that was a little bit simpler because the genres naturally kind of mend and blend together in a very beautiful way. For this book, I had to get a little bit more creative with it. So I chose to label it again. I think comp titles, as Adrian had mentioned earlier, is so helpful for this because every book has a comp title. It's just a matter of how creative you want to get with it. So I comped my book as a Bollywood-inspired second chance romance and then named the ideal Bollywood romance novel that I wanted to comp there with the themes of Happy Death Day, which for anyone who doesn't know that film is a horror comedy time loop. And you might be wondering, how does that work? But Happy Death Day is about a sorority girl in college that is continuously killed by a murderer at the end of every single time loop to force her to reconcile her own self issues and self-esteem issues and how she treats other people because she keeps getting murdered. So the concept of karma through time loops and making you a better person was what I directly comped to for my book. So you can go crazy with it. And I think that for some reason that worked in traditional publishing. And I will be the first to say traditional publishing does not always reward out of the box creativity because, again, they are trying to sell thousands of books to a really large audience. And sometimes being center of the road is easier for that marketing plan. But I think finding a publisher and finding an agent that's willing to take chances on your creativity and your vision, I cannot emphasize that enough. And it was what I did with choosing my agent and choosing my publisher. I made it very clear that I was never going to be the writer that wasn't blending things and take it or leave it, essentially. And that has helped to create this culture, at least for me, writing speculative romance. So that's how I label my stories. I think comps is the most easy way to get someone to get into it. But I think there are many ways. So I will hand it off to everyone else who knows even more.
Like I would echo what you said. Like comps are really important, and they can be hard when you're blending genres. You might think that you need a comp that's like an exact match for your book or something. And this is something that I have tried to tell my editing clients and participants in. I do a weekly writing workshop, and so we've talked about comps many times on there, and you can get really creative with your comps. They don't have to be an exact match for your book, especially if you're blending genres and doing something that's really unique and there's not really a direct comp for it. Pick things that have similar themes. Pick things that maybe have a similar style, or maybe a similar plot where the characters are doing something that's kind of along the same lines as what your characters are doing. Um, and yeah, you just have to get really creative with your comps. And I think comps are important whether you're doing traditional publishing or self-publishing.
Mhm.
It's important to have some sort of comparison that you can make to your book to help, because we've talked about, reader expectations and, what you want readers to expect when they pick up your book. And so it's really important to have those comp titles there as part of your marketing to help readers kind of get an idea of the vibe that you're creating with your book, right? So yeah, I think that's especially if you're doing blended genres, I think that's a really important element for labeling your book is coming up with some really good comp titles.
What you said about like theme, both of you about theme, it's like I think thematic resonance, like from one story to the next, is super important.
Mhm.
Because yeah, Ananya, your book, like even though it's a horror time loop, the thematic resonance and the thematic similarities are so on point that it's like this is perfect. And you can see in social media right now, it's like oh, Severance is out or The Last of Us is out. And so many of the publishers are like, if you like this, then read this. And it's like, that is exactly how comps should work. If you like this character, if you like this kind of book, then you should check this out. And in the case of self-publishing, it is really helpful to have that defined at the beginning. Like since I launched Mushroom Blues, I was like Blade Runner, True Detective, and District 9 meld with the weird worlds of Jeff Vandermeer and China Miéville. If that one line doesn't give you a clear idea of like what you're in for, then I can't help you. But when it comes to self-publishing, there are different levels that you have to kind of think about, especially when you are uploading your book to Amazon KDP or Ingram Spark or different publishing platforms. They basically give you this like rigid list of genres that you have to choose, and you have to pick for Amazon KDP, like here's my number one, here's my number two, and here's my number three as your genre categories. And so you have to think ahead of time, like just go search it up and look through the list and think like, what is this ideally for my book? What is the number one, the number two, and the number three that can, from an Amazon algorithm perspective, give people a clear sense of where to find my book and how to rank my book and all that different kind of stuff that comes into play. The benefit of these different platforms is, yes, you do have these pretty rigid categories, but you also have keywords that you can input. And in those keywords is where you can get more defined. So you can think about it in terms of what we were saying earlier. Have your core. These are like the two genres that I'm going to stick with in terms of like my pitch and how I'm going to market my book and put it out there. And then you can think of the keywords as your subgenres. And you can very like an entire sentence. For mine, one of mine is murder mystery with female protagonist. You can get very specific with it, because what that applies to is when someone goes to the search bar in Amazon and says, I want to find a murder mystery book with a female protagonist, that gives my book a better chance of appearing on the first page. And so what you have to think about is very clearly, what are my main genres? Those are your categories. What are my subgenres or my themes or certain sort of important elements in my book? Those go into your keyword. And you can do this for Ingram Spark as well. You can do it for other platforms. So you have to be really conscious and very purposeful about how you apply your genres to these algorithms. And I know it sucks because a lot of this is like, my career is in the hands of algorithms a lot of the time as a self-published author. But if you can do it well and you can figure out the categories and keywords that really work for you, then you'll be golden. And you also have the added benefit of being able to go back and edit that as time goes on. So you can repurpose your genres and move them around and give them different prioritization to see what works. For me, it's like science fiction murder mystery ended up being like my top, but then there's also like cyberpunk, science fiction, and urban fantasy. But different categories, different genres have given me greater prioritization. For some reason, science fiction murder mystery is always the one where I appear the highest. So you can play around with it, you can experiment, not just with your story, but also with the way that you market and the way that you publish your book.
I don't know if this is necessarily the right answer, but whatever genre is prominent in the work that you're writing is probably going to take precedence, and that's not always a good thing. The because it kind of limits you from reaching a wider audience in certain cases. I don't know if this is like the best example, but the one that I remember is there was a time where I love Octavia Butler's work, right? And for the longest, when I would go to the bookstore, when I first, learned about, her work, um, her work was always in the African American section, which wasn't a problem. But then it's one of those things where, why wasn't her work as prominent in the science fiction section? So, I'm aging myself into like, letting people know, you know, um, I remember that time. And so now when I go to the bookstore, when I see her work prominently featured in the science fiction section. So, I think that's that's an example of when, and African American fiction is not only necessarily a genre, but that's an example of, possibly if you categorize a work as either um, something and it has multiple ones, there's a chance that you might, miss out on it if it's not in a particular section, if that makes any sense, or categorized a certain way. Um, so I don't know. I don't know if you put a hyphen between the two types of genres. I don't know if there's a way to label I mean, just me, a story like with multiple ones, but that fits the categorization ways of bookstores and booksellers and whatnot. So that's like a roundabout way of answering the question.
I think my answer for this would perhaps be two-pronged. On one hand, I think whatever foundational take, core, anything that you have chosen to be that base will likely be what you'd lead with. And this is
Mhm.
purely marketing. This is not something that I
Yeah.
necessarily think is right, but is just how it will be. And so if you have a heist fantasy, if you have a speculative, there's a book I read recently that it's set in this world, but they go into like a dream world and it's set under fiction. And you can see that it's had a lot more readership than if it had been set under fantasy or even
Mhm.
speculative. And majority of the book is in this dream world. So, you could say that it is speculative, but because it's being put as general fiction, it just has that kind of wider readership. And so there is a balancing act there on what you can choose and how far you go, depending on how far into the speculative you kind of go into. And then there are also genres that have roles. I think romance has one of the most primarily or popularly known role in that it has to be um, a happily ever after. And so if you include that into your blender, you have to know that if you ever say the word romance to anyone in the pitch, that readers will expect you to have that happily ever after within the blend. And so those are a few things to consider. However, when it comes to genre as just the general idea of it for categorization, I do believe it's very strongly a very publishing and marketing thing. And I say that because I'm Nigerian and I grew up in Nigeria, and so I write stories that, or my fantasy story anyways, involves like myths and folklores and things like that. And in my culture, we don't recognize genres. We don't split stories into these boxes. Um, it's just fiction. So it's either real or not real. But even in the real or not real, in the stories that I would have heard growing up and these folklores, I wouldn't have considered that, someone somewhere could not have powers to fly. I would just think I can't fly doesn't mean someone else can't fly. And so we don't really separate it in that this is absolutely not possible and this is possible. And so there is that blend that did not exist for me until I started writing in for like Western market, if that makes sense. And so I think there's also that um, influence of what you're trying to sell and who you're trying to sell it to.
Well, we've put things in the blender. We have stuff to drink, I suppose. I mean, do you eat stuff that comes out of a blender? I don't know. But with all of that said, we've distilled all of these different ideas into one concoction, and now it's time to say farewell and have that last drink together. So, from all of the things we've talked about, what is one thing that you would want the people listening to this and watching this and talking in Discord about this? What's one thing you want them to take away, and where can they find you if they want to say hello, see you on social media, see your website, find your books, etc., etc.? We are a little pressed for time, so do take a second, clear your mind, condense it, and rock and roll.
Thank you for having me. I think one final thing to take away is any genre is possible to be blended as long as you know the core of your story, and the key is experimentation. So truly have fun with it. No book came out of a marketing plan. No book came out of strategy. Books come out of fun and creativity. So just put yourself into it and it's going to be wonderful. And then where you can find me, my books are sold wherever books are sold, Barnes& and Noble, Amazon, Target, literally anywhere in the world, but I always will plug my favorite indie bookstores because I think we should support indie bookstores. So Arvita Book Company in Orange County, California, and Books of Wonder in New York City are my favorites. And you can find me online just by searching my name. I'm on literally every social media possible. So I will see you somewhere.
Yeah, I think you really did a really good job of condensing that into like our kind of our main points that we touched on throughout this. I would add one thing, which is that you should be writing for yourself first. You are your own ideal reader. We kind of touched on this. You are your own ideal reader. There will be other readers who want to read your book. So write for yourself, and then figure out how to sell it to others if that's what you're into doing. Um, so yeah. You can find me on in mainly two places. I'm on social media, so you can find me on social media. But you can find me on my website, which is ahawkwrites.com. Or no, I'm sorry. Whoa. Ahawkwrites is my social media handle. My website is aphawkinsauthor.com. There we go. And you can also find me and my editing company at tomworksedits.com.
Well, thank you for having me, first of all. It's been a blast. Don't be afraid. This just applies to writing in general, but I think when it comes to the experimentation, when it comes to writing for yourself, the best thing you can do is tell yourself, I will suck and I will always suck at first, but the more you practice and the more you're trying things out and just kind of going with it, the more likely it is that you're going to find something that you really like, a genre that really clicks with your story or genres that really click well together. And at the same time, you're going to develop your skills. So if you don't give yourself the chance to say, I'm going to suck, you're too afraid of that, then you're never going to be able to give yourself the chance to be a writer and to improve as a writer and improve at your craft and figure out more things that you can just throw into that ninja and mix together. So yeah, just give yourself the opportunity to be a little bit fearless and suck, even if it's just for a little while. You'll get better. You keep improving if you keep practicing. You can find me pretty much anywhere at Adrian M. Gibson. You can check out my podcast, which releases every Tuesday. That's SFF Addicts Pod. You can find that on like Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, all the platforms. And you can pick up Mushroom Blues. That is in all formats. You can find an audiobook, ebook, paperback, hardcover. Amazon's the easiest place to find it, but you can also go to your indie bookstore. You can just tell them the title of my book and it'll be in the system and you can order it through them. So hopefully you'll go and support your indie bookstores. But yeah, thank you so much for having me on. This has been very fun.
Be selfish, write for yourself, and have fun with it. So I think that is what happens when you blend genres. You bring the best and most fun parts of these different um, categories of stories, and you get this like healthy mix. I think like a lot of the stuff that I enjoy is genre blends or genre blends. So be selfish, write for yourself and have fun with it. As far as for where you can find me, website is Robert K. Jeffrey, JEFFREY.com, robertkjeffrey.com. And the Instagram, you can find me at robertk.jeffrey, robertk.jeffrey.
My one thing to take away is I'd say, break the rules after you've learned the rules. Just it helps to know what you're trying to break out of. And so it will help you be more confident in defining this new thing that you've created or blended. Where you can find me, my website is justmarv.org. And my social media across all the platforms, Instagram, Twitter, Blue Sky, all of them, is just Marv Writes. So that's JUSTMARVE Writes.
All right, thank you all so much for being here. We've had a lovely panel. This has been an awesome time. I've learned a lot. Um, for those who don't know, my name is Jesse Pullman. I'm available on Blue Sky at jpullmanwriting.com. My website is jpullmanwriting.com. If you have any questions about this panel and you're not in the Discord chatter, like you see this 6 months after it airs, and you're like, "Hey, I have a question about this," reach out to me. I will try to forward the question to the appropriate person. Otherwise, that's all the time we have for our panel about blenders. I hope you found a nice nutrition thing and you're all good. No, I'm kidding. Thank you all so much for joining us at How to Blend Genres. We hope you'll continue the discussion in the Discord chat. Remember to ask your question. You'll receive an answer in the near future. Until then, please don't forget to check out our many panelists at their other events at Write Hive 2025. And if you like someone in particular's vibe, please check out their website or social media for more about them. There will be information about them in the Discord, including books, anything that's referenced. Panelists, just as a reminder, if you get me the book titles and book links, I will make sure we have a thing set up for that for the event, even if it's just dropped in Discord at some point for people to refer to. So thank you all again so much. As I take a final sip of tea from my Write Hive cup, we do have those on occasion. So if we have one, you should get one. No, but seriously, anything helps out. We have all sorts of stuff that goes on year round, such as our year round Discord where we do weekly write-ins that I host sometimes. We have the Word Nerd Cafe. We have our Write Hive Light mini retreat, usually in around October. And we have so many other things in the Write Hive universe. Thank you all so much for being with us. It's been a blast. Have a great night, day, whatever time this airs. I don't know yet. We don't have it scheduled. Bye-bye, everyone.